My dear friends, the true science starts with a definition of the object of its studies. The pseudoscience gives a story, more or less interesting, but no definition. There are millions of books and works dealing with the psyche and its disorders. Have you ever, however, met in any of them a definition of the psyche? A valid definition, valid all over the world? The question is open, and the rest is silence. My definition of the psyche is the following: the psyche is a process of a current symbolic exchange between the subject of the psyche and its current environment, is the subjective definition, and the objective definition is the psyche is a process of a current symbolic exchange between two subjects of the psyche. In my work, I explain this definition. My definition of the psyche defines it as a dynamic phenomenon, not static one, as the psyche was understood and described until now. In other words, all static descriptions of the psyche are only metaphors. It means that in reality, all the psychology language of so far, starting with Freud's works and millions of books of other authors, should be seen as kind of poetry and not, of course, as a scientific writing. However, it has been understood until now not literal until now literally. It has been understood until now literally, and in such a way, a false science misled the civilization and millions of suffering people. Meanwhile, it's an absurd that such an obvious to everybody statement sounds like a great discovery that the psyche is not an observable object. After all, nobody has ever seen it. So we can neither observe it nor describe it as an object. This absurd is more absurd than the situation before Copernicus regarding the obvious common observation that the sun moved on the sky. Everybody could see it with his own eyes. And still, Copernicus was the only one to question this common observation. As a matter of fact, it was the declaration of Copernicus what was absurd, in a way, being contradictory to the observable fact. The declaration of Copernicus was in a justified way rejected by the science of that time. The science before him had an observable proof of what moved and what did not. Still, the final proof could get only those of us who could see the Earth from the cosmic space. It means that the observation, being a basis of all science, is not, however, enough to be decisive. The point of view of the observation is decisive. The surface of the Earth was a wrong point of view to decide if the sun moved around the Earth, or was it the other way around? But until the 20th century, it was only accessible point of view. It was the only accessible point of view. So until cosmic trips, the observation that the sun moves around the Earth was totally justifiable. With my work, I want to show that in the case of the psyche, it's also the question of the point of view. Until now, the psychology was founded on the static point of view on the psyche. The psyche was described by Freud, the founder of the 20th century psychology, as a static object. This object was divided by Freud in a typically static way, in portions like ego, superego, id, consciousness, subconsciousness. It was a kind of a magic world with its enigmatic static structures, a world of objects totally strange to an everyday life of the people, and hence the necessity of a translator, which a psychotherapist is supposed to be. It's assumed by a client that the psychotherapist knows the enigmatic world of the psyche and will be able to describe it in a language understood by everybody. This approach resembles a lot the way the spiritual groups function like. Both in the case of the psychology of so far and in the case of spiritual groups, there is a group of people who know the sacred knowledge about respectively the psyche and the spiritual world, and there is the rest of the people who know nothing or know only as much as those who know will tell them. Two worlds: sacrum, the world where only those who know have an access to, and profanum, the clients of those who know. Actually, what is this sacred knowledge of the psychology of so far? It's an invented and all the time a new reinvented story about the sacrum, an enigmatic world of the psyche where nothing is certain, everything possible, and the most important role is played by those who know. To tell a client a story about the psyche. The biggest of the storytellers of the psychology of so far, like Freud, were those whose stories were the most original and strange. Why strange? Because the sacrum cannot be as banal as the profanum if they should be clearly separated from each other. Without this separation, there would be no need for those who know. This explains why psychology of so far has not come until now to become a science. The science is a destroyer of the sacrum because the science discovers the laws to understand the world. And the world governed by the laws is no longer enigmatic. In this way, the sacrum becomes the profanum. In consequence, those who know are superfluous. Knowing the laws of the nature and using logical thinking is enough to get on in the profanum world. Everybody can do it. This is why those who know in the psychology of so far are the last to try to establish and popularize any laws ruling the psyche, if they happen to discover them. A day when the psyche becomes the science will be their last day. They will combat before, however, any real attempt to make the psychology become the science. They will combat, however, any real attempt to make the psychology become the science. When it comes to the psyche, everybody, from his own experience, accepts the fact that it exists. The question is only that nobody could ever see it with the eyes as an observable object. Nevertheless, everybody accepts its metaphorical descriptions as if they were those of an observable object. Why? because until now people have had no choice. The same as until Copernicus. There was no alternative. People believe in what authors write. You get the alternative to the description of the psyche of so far. This is this alternative. So, what can we say about the psyche? Scientifically speaking, only this what can be observed. Of course, as the example of Copernicus shows, observation itself is not a guarantee that what we see is what we see. But in the case of the psyche, it's just the reverse of the case of Copernicus, because the observation of so far sees nothing. Until cosmic trips, scientific procedure based on the observation, which is the condition sine qua non of the true science, could not accept the calculations of Copernicus, even if mathematically speaking they looked correct and plausible. In other words, Copernicus, 400 years before the observation made from the point of view of the cosmic space, gave mathematical arguments that the observation made from the point of view of the Earth's surface was wrong. My role in the history of the psycho exploration is the reverse of the role played by Copernicus in the cosmos exploration. Namely, Copernicus, with mathematical arguments, proved that the description of the observation of the sun movement on the sky was only a guise of the truth. And the mistake of that false observation consisted in a wrong point of view of the observation of the sun movement. I, in turn, with my logic, biology, physics, chemistry, and evolutionary arguments, try to prove that the description of the psyche in force, based on no observation, is also only a guise of the truth. A guise which is the same invented as it was before Copernicus. One thing jumps, however, to the eyes. People 2,000, 1,400 years ago seemed to be better thinkers than people today. Why? These ancient people, even if wrong in their description of the sun movement, are excused by the argument of the observation in their favor. People of the 20th and the 21st century, in turn, believe in a description of the psyche based on what? On no observation. My role in this turning point of the psyche exploration is to stop the era of descriptions of the psyche based on no observation. In order to make this observation possible, I had to search for a possibility to observe the psyche. And this possibility could be found, but not there where millions and millions of people have not found it before me. It could not be found in the static dimension of the reality. My Copernican breakthrough was to move the point of view of the psyche observation from the static dimension of the reality to the dynamic one. And this act made all the difference. I could finally observe and define what the psyche is. the definition of the psyche in hand, I could start the science of the psyche. And what can be observed is a dynamic phenomenon, the dynamic process. This dynamic process, I call it by definition of the psyche, the current symbolic exchange. It means that it's not possible to talk about the psyche of a person. It does not exist. What exists is only the psyche as a momentary current symbolic exchange. It means that the psyche of a person is a sequence of infinitely small momentary symbolic exchanges, the same as the light is the sequence of infinitely small photons of light. For this reason, the psyche as a process can be disturbed, but of course, it cannot be sick. And for this reason, I don't use these expressions. Of course, you will still find in my work expressions reminding of the era of the static psycho descriptions, like two poles, interpolar space. I could not, however, start writing about the psyche using the language which is not understood by you, my dear listeners, already from the first moment. For a very simple reason, I couldn't. Nobody before me wrote about the psyche as about a dynamic phenomenon. You maybe wonder why I am the only one to treat the psyche as a phenomenon and not like an object. The answer is easy, however, because I have never seen the psyche, and I have never heard that anybody has. Still, it exists. The conclusion can be only one. It's a dynamic phenomenon. Thank you.